It's Mo. It's May. But in April, it was Old School April. Old School April is a super fun readathon and a chance to watch old school 80s and 90s TV shows, movies, listen to the music, all that sort of fun stuff. And I don't know who puts this one on exactly, but I know Criminale participates in this, and Alex from the Bookubus, and Pretty in Paper Cuts, 3 channels that I absolutely love. So if you're interested in Old School April, I'm sure it'll come around again next year. Make sure to go and check out their channels. There is an Old School April tag, which I do want to do, but I think I've kind of missed the opportunity to do it. But Alex did kind of a supplementary tag style video where she talked about the weirdest crushes she had when she was young. So this is when she was very, very young, growing up in the decade that she grew up in. That's old school for her. And she talks about the weird crushes that she had. So I thought that was a super fun idea and very silly. Someone could definitely make this a tag. I don't think by adding my 2 cents I'm making it a tag, but I did think it would be fun to share with you some of my weirdest crushes from when I was little. So this is like probably, I don't know, preteens, teens kind of era crushes that I had. They're definitely old school. They're definitely in the 90s when I was growing up. And I'm gonna go from least weird to weird, but I did not put them in order on the piece of paper that I have, so I'm gonna have to kind of guess as I go along what my least weird to weird crushes were. So I think for my least weird crushes, I'm gonna go with Ed and Chris from Northern Exposure. I was completely obsessed, and kind of still am actually, with the show Northern Exposure, which is about a doctor who thinks he's going to a big city in Alaska, Juneau, Alaska, and work off his medical debt that he's incurred in New York medical school, but he finds out that he's actually going to a teeny tiny little town called Sicily, Alaska, and there he meets the wild town members that live there, 2 of which I definitely had big crushes on. So Ed is one of the first characters that we meet from Sicily, and he's kind of like the town's like errand boy. Ed is tasked to get Dr. Joel Fleischman and bring him around and show him his new practice, doctoring office, and all that stuff. And Ed is really just like a quirky, fun character. Also, he can be like quite enigmatic, like he will disappear at a moment's notice, or he'll leave Dr. Fleischman in the middle of the woods. But he's really into film. Throughout the seasons of Northern Exposure, we see him like learn more about film, become like more of himself in the film world, and he's just a fun character. He's very quirky. Everybody's quirky in Northern Exposure. He's also like super handsome. He has long dark hair and he wears like a leather jacket, so not very weird, but like a little bit weird. And then Chris, I would say, is also not that weird because he is super hot and he is a reader. He loves to read. He loves Walt Whitman. He loves everything, poetry and the Beat Generation and all sorts of stuff like that. And he runs the local radio show, so he's always quoting different authors and different books and talking about spirituality and different paths and walks of life. And of course he is, like I said, super handsome with like long dark hair, and the kind of weird myth around him is that he just like finds women everywhere. So he'll just be out in the woods and like find a woman and bring her back to his trailer where he lives. So those 2 are not like very weird. And then another one that's not very weird is I was totally obsessed with X-Files, more obsessed with X-Files than I was with Northern Exposure. I loved everything X-Files. I bought every magazine that had an article on X-Files. I bought the trading cards. I had the comics, everything I could get my hands on that was X-Files. This was at a time, you know, long before DVDs, so I would videotape the show off of the TV when it was on. I would set the VCR and videotape the show, and I had dozens of videotapes with all the different episodes, and if they were in reruns, I could like get the episodes that I didn't have, and I was completely obsessed, specifically with Mulder. So Mulder was a huge crush for me. Obviously, he's a dreamer, but he's also super passionate about aliens and alien life and avenging his sister and finding out what happened to her when he and Scully worked together more, how their dynamic worked and their relationship. And now I would say I probably am more of a fan. Well, I'm not more of a fan of Scully, but like I have a better appreciation now that I'm older for Scully, and I probably would have had more of a crush on Scully when I was younger if Mulder wasn't so captivating. Kind of a weird crush. The next one is another, not like super weird, but a little bit weird. I think my next weirdest crush, it would be Gina Davis's character in Transylvania 5-6000. So I loved Transylvania 5-6000 when I was young, and I mentioned VHSs before, and any movies that I loved on VHS, I would rent the VHS over and over and over again, and I would just watch it like as many times as I could. So I watched a ton of my favorite movies like that. I watched The Princess Bride like that. I loved Wizard of Oz when I was really young, so we did that with Wizard of Oz. You know, all these movies, and Transylvania 5-6000 was one of them. And I think one of the reasons that I loved it was that it was very adult, had very adult themes and humor that I didn't quite understand. And probably if I watched it now, I would have a much better understanding of it. But back then, I just remember like loving the Halloween kind of vibe and the different spooky people in it. Like we did watch a lot of things like that, those kind of jokey Halloween or jokey spooky movies, like, oh my god, what's the Mel Brooks one? With Frankenstein. I don't know why I can't, all of a sudden it just flew out of my head. But we watched those movies. I was allowed to watch those movies. I wasn't really allowed to watch like scary movies, like horror movies. But I loved vampires, and I loved Gina Davis's vampire character. Now, at the moment, like I don't remember anything about her except that she was super sexy and she had a super sexy outfit. She had the super low cut top, and she was like silly and beautiful and young, and that she was like misunderstood. You know, I think one of the things that I liked about that movie growing up was that everyone looked like a monster, but they were just kind of misunderstood, and that monsters are people too. The more that these go on, the more like I don't remember why I had a crush on them, what it was specifically besides them being like attractive that made me crush on them. I remember that feeling of like being excited, like having a crush, feeling butterflies, being happy to like look at that celebrity crush on the TV or in a movie. I don't know what's weirder. I think this is the less weird one. So all the girls, the main character girls from the movie Dr. Detroit with Dan Aykroyd. I love that movie too. That was another one that like had adult themes, had violent elements, but it was mostly silly and funny, and it was Dan Aykroyd, so I was allowed to watch that, and I loved the women in that. There are 4 women, 2 white women, a black woman, and an Asian woman, who he takes on to help. And when I was young, they were just so glamorous, they were so beautiful, they wore these amazing ball gowns, and they always had sequins, and they were so fantastic looking, and they all helped him, and they needed his help, but they weren't helpless women, which was really attractive, I feel like. Obviously, I didn't really understand that they were prostitutes when I was a kid, and I didn't really get that he was a pimp, and that he was like saving them from a worse pimp. It took me a long time and many years later before I realized that. Also, I cite that movie and that crush, the crush on those girls, as like how my parents didn't know I was queer. Like, how could they have not known I was queer? These are the people that I'm crushing on. Again, I don't remember exactly why I crushed on them, but like looking back, they were so glamorous. That there was a range of diversity among them probably was really enticing to me. That was a weird crush, but definitely a crush that I had when I was young. I think the next weirdest crush I had when I was young, which goes right along with that, is the 1990s Versace ads. So it was Christy Turlington, Naomi Campbell, Christy Brinkley, like all the top 90s models. Christy Turlington especially, I had a huge crush on, and I loved all her ad work, and I loved seeing her in fashion spreads. She was so beautiful, and I definitely had a crush on her. But that ad particular, where they were wearing like little sweaters and like little metallic leather skirts, pastel colored metallic leather skirts. I was obsessed with that ad. And there were different ones. There was the one with them all together, and then there was like close-ups of them, or there was ones with just a few of them posed, and I was totally obsessed with that ad, totally obsessed with Versace clothing in general, but his ad work was amazing, and just that whole height top of Versace fashion I loved. I loved fashion when I was a kid. I wanted to go to FIT, which is the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, and I wanted to be a designer, so I loved looking at all of that kind of stuff. But I definitely like had that ad multiple times like cut out and like pasted on my wall, and those girls were just so beautiful, they were so glamorous, and it was just the epitome of fashion and like extravagance, but also like luxury, and it was definitely crush worthy. The last two are like a toss-up. I did have a big crush on Darkwing Duck. I remember very little about the Darkwing Duck cartoon anymore. I remember that I liked it. I remember that he was an adventurer, but a bungling adventurer. I remember that he was a little arrogant and thought he was like so great, but most of the people around him actually like helped him. But I also remember that he was like kind and that he was suave. My biggest reoccurring cartoon crush for sure. He also had like a hot vampire girlfriend too, if I remember correctly. And I do remember that my favorite Darkwing Duck episodes were the episodes where she and the other like Hollywood monsters were around. You know, I loved Gargoyles too. Desdemona from Gargoyles could have made it on this list, but the last and I think the weirdest crush that I had is another cartoon. It is the two main characters from the episode of Batman the Animated Series that was called Tiger, Tiger. So it had the poem Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright in it, and in it we see a Dr. Moreau type character kidnapping Catwoman, Selena Kyle, taking her to a remote island and giving her a serum that turns her into an actual cat person. So Selena Kyle, always a huge crush, of course. I mean, if I had to crush on her a little bit older, it would definitely be Selena Kyle from Batman Year One. She's amazing. But the Batman Animated Series, Selena Kyle was totally hot too, of course. She's a little like old Hollywood style for me, like blonde, Lana Turner-esque kind of style. But in Tiger, Tiger, she gets turned into an actual tiger person. And the reason that she's getting turned into a cat person is because this doctor has already created another cat person. His kind of Dr. Moreau trophy creation is this like dark, brooding, handsome, buff cat man, and he wants Selena Kyle to be his cat man's mate. And then of course Batman has to come in and save her. But throughout that we see that this cat man, this cat creature, he's a little bit scary, he's like a little bit aggressive, he's a little bit forceful, but we see him coming to love Selena Kyle and her to coming to understand and respect his want for love and his need for love and companionship, and how he was really dealt a rough hand by being born and created a cat person and not being like a genuine man. And in the end, when Batman comes to rescue her, she kind of has to make a hard decision whether she's going to stay with the cat man. But obviously she can't. She has to go back to her real life. And it's this like tragic ending where the crazy doctor is injured. They could just leave him and die, or Batman could take him to face justice. But the cat man ends up understanding that Selena needs to go back and taking away the doctor. I think one of the last lines that he says is that even though the doctor did the wrong thing, he's still his creator, he's still his father. Just very crushworthy Catman and Selena Kyle as a Catwoman, and then them together. That is probably my weirdest childhood crush, my old school crush. So those were about 10, sort of a little bit more. Those were 10 weird crushes that I had when I was a kid, 10 old school weird crushes. So if you want to do this, definitely consider yourself tagged. Again, this isn't a real tag, but I think it was a great idea. And thanks again to Alex from the Bookubus for coming up with this fun idea. Her video is amazing. I will list it down below, so definitely go and check it out. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!